Hello, everybody. Welcome to our online virtual chat. I'm Jill Catherine, and the host of our Everybody Matters Family and Friends edition. And this is our opportunity once a month to tune in and have a conversation about those who are on a healing journey in their bodies, from an eating disorder or disordered eating. And this is our opportunity as family and friends to get support for you to be able to be there for your loved one and to also take care of you in the process. So I'm thankful to be here. We host this chat once a month, and we have a theme, a topic each month that we center our conversation around. And today's topic is how to help without harming. You know, I think for so many of us who have a loved one who's going through the brain disease of an eating disorder, is that it's very difficult to understand. And all we want to do is help. We want to help as much as possible to, you know, I've recovered and healed from an eating disorder. So I've been your loved one, and I've also had friends who've struggled with this disease. And I can honestly say with 100% of myself that I really have an understanding of both experiences. I've been the family and friend who's been furious and outrageous and doesn't understand and wants them to be better and what can I do to help, and you know, felt that really intense sense of you know, not having any control, that you don't know what to do. And I've also been the one who was in the disease and who really had to fight tooth and nail to get out of it, to help my brain to heal, and then help my soul to heal and my body to heal. So I come to this call having both experiences, and I think there's some value in that. So what we want to talk today about is how you can help without harming. And I think that's there. I wish I could give you really clear-cut steps on how to do that you could just follow these 10 guidelines, how to help without harming. And I say this every month when we do our calls, is that unfortunately, it doesn't work like that, that every situation is different. Every human being who's going through this disease is different. So there aren't these cookie cutter steps, but there are some broad guidelines and ways for us to approach the journey that our loved one is on that can hopefully provide more help to them than more harm. And we use that phrase, help and not harm, because the complexity of this disease is such that so often we think we're helping and oftentimes we're harming. And it's not because we intend to or that we want to, but because the disease is so complex, it's hard to know how to help and what to do and what to say. And that's just the reality of this disease. And so I have, you know, just 3 basic and broad guidelines that I think I'm going to offer that you could use on this journey with your loved one. So the 3 guidelines are, number 1 is to listen, number 2 is respond, and number 3 is to respect. And we'll go through those 3 more specifically, but listen, respond, and respect. So this is the framework that we'll use to go deeper into how we can support our loved one in a helpful way. So the first is to listen. So sounds cliche, right? Well, we all listen. Anybody can listen. And, you know, actually listening to someone who is suffering with this brain disease can be a really difficult process for a couple reasons. it for us who are not experiencing the brain disease, that it doesn't make sense to our brains. So if our loved one if is trusting us to share with us and we're able to listen to them, the things that they're going to say aren't going to make any sense. They're not rational. You know, the dysmorphia that happens in the brain for people who are struggling with eating disorders, that what they see isn't what you see, what they experience isn't going to be what you experience. It's a dysmorphic way of what's happening in their brain and body. So it's not going to make sense. A lot of the things that they're saying, that they're feeling, it's not going to make sense to you rationally. A lot of the things that they're doing and choosing to do, and the ways that they're thinking and seeing their bodies, it's not going to make sense to you because your brain isn't sick with the disease like theirs is. So that's where we first start, is that to try to provide good support as a family member or a friend, you have to first come to the knowing that listening is really important, and that your experience in listening is not going to be rational to your mind, and that it's so critical in your own process and understanding about eating disorders is that it's a disease in the brain, that the brain actually starts to function differently through the malnourishment of however it's happening in the body. And I mean, that we have science now, and there's a much greater field that is understanding the neuroscience of what's happening in the brain with eating disorders. But I can tell you, as somebody who's been through one, that the years that I was really sick in the disease, it's almost if it's a blackout, right? How my brain is today, I don't remember those years. There's experiences I had in college with friends that they all tell these stories that I was there and I experienced, but I can't remember them at all. So, I remember for me a moment where I always had a disordered thinking about my body, and a negative body image and negative thoughts about my body. And that was pretty normal. I'd have that a lot. But I still function in my day-to-day life, and those thoughts never over consumed me. But at some point when there was a point when that switched, when I started engaging in really unhealthy behaviors in both nutrition and exercise, and that activated the disease, the disorder in the brain. And I remember all of a sudden there was a switch, that there was this voice in my head, and there was this way of thinking that did not exist before. And I've never experienced that in my head since then. I know my brain is the fact where still I'll have days that, being in the world, you're influenced with all these messages, these mixed messages around the body. So I still am in the world and have days where I might have thoughts that are negative about my body, but that is just being an influence in the world, but it's not that disease of the brain. So it's really important that you accept the truth and the knowing of that this affects the brain. So when you're listening, you're to expect someone with this disease to have a rational mind will be very frustrating, and that won't be helpful to them. The other aspects of listening is that being able to listen to what's not being said, because we tend to hear in the early, so it really depends, this chat today, the content of what you're going to listen to and respond to and respect is going to be different based on the stage of healing that person is in the eating disorder. If it's really early on, is going to be a different experience of support than if they're moving through recovery. because of what's going on in the brain. So as they move through recovery and the different, stages of recovery, the brain starts to get more healthy. So you're gonna listen and hear different things. You're gonna maybe respond differently. Maybe you're gonna respect differently. So I'll do my best to try and touch on a spectrum of that journey. But so in the listening part is if you can listen to what's not being said, because yes, you want to listen and really, well, let's take a step back for a second before we go into that piece. Listening is a skill that's active, but not necessarily communicative. So listening doesn't mean finding solutions. Listening means being actively engaged in what is being shared by your loved one and not needing to solve it right then as you're listening. And that's a really powerful thing, because those who are going through this journey, it is a horrible experience. It is very dark. It is very controlling in there. And there's a lot of fear and shame. And so when those who are struggling have the privilege of you there as a loved one to listen, it's really important that you take that seriously and just listen. And so honoring the space of not always having to find a solution is really important in this journey. But then also listening to what's not being said. So, it's that reading in between the lines. So when those of us who become sick with this brain disease, there's usually a trigger or multiple triggers or some form of traumas or multiple traumas that traumatize the heart, the emotional self that ends up getting to this place. And that place then becomes really obsessed with food and body and exercise. And so that becomes so much of what you're going to be hearing as a listener of what they're going to be talking about. But the root is much, much deeper. The root is about not feeling worthy, not feeling enough, not knowing how to mend a broken heart, how to mend feelings of pain and anger and sadness and grief, not feeling, being scared, not feeling worthy again. So that's what's broadly, each of us have very specific journeys to how we get here, and I don't want to dismiss that and water it down, but very broadly, that's what's underneath so much of this disease, is not feeling worthy and not feeling good enough. And so as you listen to what's not being said, that's what's really there. It's not the part of the body, all that stuff is there too, but that's what's on the surface, right? That's physically, that's what's on the surface, but underneath are these deeper emotional things of not feeling enough and good enough. And a lot of times those of us who have those feelings, because most human beings do, but those of us who end up with an eating disorder, that feeling of unworthiness has an attachment to the body, or has an attachment to the definitions of society's definitions, or your definitions, or coaches' definitions, or other influencers' definitions of what's beautiful, what the body should look like, what's attractive, what's healthy should look like, what the body should look like. So we don't make that up. I mean, that influences us and not feeling worthy. If our bodies don't meet all those standards, if our beauty doesn't meet all those standards, that certainly adds to that underlying value of not feeling worthy and not feeling good enough. When we're not meeting some external standard. So that's a real connection to how we end up with eating disorders. But if we're listening in between the lines, is that feeling of worthiness that we take out on the body because of what we're not meeting, that can be resolved by being able to cultivate a sense of self-worth that's independent of these external standards of beauty and health and success and all these other things. It's about cultivating an inner standard of what it means to be who we are. So that moves us into the respond stage, is that after our listening and after we active listen, and by listening to what's being said and listening from a place of understanding that there's no rationale in the disease of the mind, when it's time for us to respond, to help our loved one without harming, is to know that when they're in the disease, the brain disease of the eating disorder, they're not able to call their own shots. That in our response phase, that, so often I'll hear parents say, well, she seemed, my child or seems to be doing okay, and says they're fine, and but they're okay, but they don't know they're in that disease of the brain. They can't decide that for themselves. And I know this gets to be a real slippery slope when we're dealing with adolescents, as opposed to when you're over 18 years old. It gives parents different abilities to influence them getting treatment or not. But in that respond phase and stage, it's important to know that when someone is sick in the brain with this, no matter what their age is, they're not capable of making the decisions that are best for their own health. That'd be like saying someone else with another brain disease, Parkinson's or another brain disease, would be capable to make those decisions for themselves. There becomes a point in the illness, and the sooner you can get help, the better. That one who has this isn't able to make the best decisions for their health. So after you're listening in your response phase, you have to be mindful of that. You have to be mindful of where someone is on this journey and their ability to make that decision, because with a brain disease, you're not able to make your health decisions for yourself. And that's where having a family member or a loved one who understands that and understands the disease of this can respond, and hopefully in a way that can help that person get the treatment that they need. And so if you're watching this call, hopefully your loved one has gotten access to treatment, is seeing someone who has specialized training with eating disorders, because not every doctor understands it. Actually, a majority don't. They don't diagnose eating disorders, not necessarily. They're not really trained to in medical school. There's a very brief training in eating disorders. So getting an appropriate diagnosis and seeking a provider who has specialization in eating disorders is so critical, because it's easy for this to go under radar for many people. And so I'm hopeful that if you're watching this and you've gotten this link through the Upstate New York Eating Disorder Service or through Ophelia's Place, these are two organizations that work together and that we both help people get connected. That's what I would suggest is the place to start, to get that provider, to set up that treatment team, to encourage your friend to reach out to Ophelia's place, to make that call, or to reach out to the upstate New York eating disorder service. And because those are specialized healthcare professionals who understand the nature of this disease and have a full treatment team in place to help, such as nutritionists and medical doctors, and also counselors and therapists who work well, who understand the complexity of the disease. So responding by knowing that those suffering with this brain disease, expecting them to be able to make this health decision is impossible a lot of the time. The other part of the response is how we respond. So let's move it now through if someone is getting the treatment, is in recovery now, started that healing journey. In this respond way to help is an opportunity for us to affirm and encourage our friend or our loved one in ways that are separate of the eating disorder. So whether there's interests and passions and hobbies that person has loved and been engaged with before, when we're responding and after our listening phase and we're responding, as much as we can help to redirect and affirm them in taking interest in themselves again, exploring these things that they loved so much or had interest in, is a really helpful tool for them. So diverting and bringing into the conversation other topics that don't have to do just with where they are in the healing phase, where they are in recovery. So it shows that we're there to listen and be of support. So when they're listening and talking about whatever is going on, we can be there and listen without having to provide a solution. But just by listening, there's a solution in that. Then when we move to the respond guideline 2 phase, when we respond, we want to be affirming and encouraging and acknowledging the work that they're doing, and affirming and encouraging that we're here and to listen and be support along the way. And then there's a beautiful opportunity then to engage in that conversation around topics or interests or passions that person has had or once had. And just broadly is just bringing it up, or bringing it back into their life in some way that works, that is specific to that person. So how we start to respond as a family member or loved one, we don't want to just stay in the eating disorder conversation. We want to start to bring in the part of the self, because when we start to recover and start the healing phase, it's a discovery of, when those of us who are suffering, we need to discover who we are. We need to discover what our interests are. We need to discover what we believe. We need to discover what new values we need to have for us. So we go through a discovery phase in that. And so during that discovery phase, and that discovery phase, there's no timeline on that. But if we're getting that treatment, we're really moving forward in good strides. And so what you can do in that respond phase is help to respond in conversation and in community with them that cultivate that discovery for them. So I hope that makes sense to you, that you can start to be a member, be there for them side by side as they start to discover who they are, by you responding in ways that reminds them and brings new opportunity for them to revisit and discover who they are. And so the third part of this guideline is how we can help without harming, is respect. So This is, I think, all the three different guideposts have their own significance. Um, oh, there's something I do want to say about the respond, and we'll probably circle through the three again. But the one thing that I want to say, and this is a very specific one, is that because the eating disorder has to do with the body, right? That our weight is influenced, and sometimes that means our weight is going to go down. That sometimes it means it's going to go up, wherever we are on our body journey. And I think what can be harmful to those who are in the recovery phase is when a loved one is responding to them based on what their body looks like, as opposed to responding to them and how they're feeling. And that is really critical, because what's going to happen all the time for those of us who struggle with eating disorders, people will say, oh, you look like you're doing so good. Oh, you must be doing better. You gained some weight. Oh, you look good, right? It all becomes that, oh, you look like you look, it always focuses on um, um, is focusing on what the body looks like. And also, another harmful thing in the response phase is focusing on what they're eating, the food part. And I know that we're just having a little technical thing with our video right now. So if refresh the screen if you're watching live. Our job isn't to be the food police. We often say that. And so when they're going through the recovery phase, responding to them eating certain foods again and the quantity of their food, it's best to not do that. It's best to not focus on the body, to focus on the food part. That can actually be more harmful than helpful. So instead, we respond on how are you feeling? What's going on? Engaging them in a conversation, talk about how they're feeling, what their thinking is. Then respond by bringing a new conversation and community around areas of interest and passions and during their exploration. In the respect phase, this is where it's really critical that we start to know that we're gonna need to respect how that person starts to discover who they are, because they can discover completely new interests. They can discover new values. They can discover new community that makes them feel more connected to who they are in a peaceful way that is part of their healing. And so this often happens, and family members and friends might not appreciate what that new hobby is, or what that new interest is, or what that new community is. It might not align with your values or your interests. And as long as it's providing healing and nurturing a wellness inside our loved one, it's really important that we hold the space to respect that. Really important. Because like we talked about before, this brain disease can come to all of us in different ways, but there's a deep unworthiness or not feeling good enough within oneself. And so when they start to work through and start to build some of that inner confidence, not based on these outside standards, but based on their own standards of what they're interested in and what they want to do, could be very different than what you've wanted them to be interested in, from studies in school to social interests, to artistic interests, to athletic interests. They could all look very different. And so if we're going to be helpful and not harmful, we're going to need to have to respect what that starts to look like for them. So another part of respect is that as we go through that discovery phase, there is there's new thinking that happens within the brain, and that really has to happen to counteract all the negative messaging that we've taken in about our bodies, about beauty, about success, about whatever it may be. When we start to discover, go through that healing phase, we have to create new beliefs that are in line with feeling good enough, with being good enough, with accepting our bodies as beautiful as is, and cultivating a wellness. And those new beliefs might not be your beliefs. You might have beliefs that believe the body should look like this, that beauty looks like this, that health looks like this, that success looks like this. And those might be in conflict with your loved one as they start to create their own beliefs. And that's where respect comes in, is that, you know, we have to give our loved one that space in their healing to create their belief system that feels right to them, that leads them on a loving journey inside their bodies. And so whether or not you agree with those beliefs, if our loved one is getting better and finding self-love and taking care of themselves, it's going to be, it might be challenging for you to accept what that looks like. And I know that's a broad way to say it, but because it's going to look different for each and every one of us. And I'll give you a specific example. When I was going through my discovery phase, it became really important for me to do two things. One, immerse myself in nature, and two, travel. And so I spent significant time that I traveled across the country and visited national parks, and had a lot of adventure. And that was really helpful in my healing, and I was connecting in nature, and travel really helped me to change my thinking and wake up to life in new ways and heal in new ways. And that was in direct conflict in what my parents thought I should be doing with that time and stage of my life, and those months, and how I should be spending my time. They foreseed me being on a certain path, and I needed to go on a different path for a little bit. You know, in hindsight, 20 years later, they can see that value of how that helped me. But at the time, it was very difficult for them to, number one, just respect that path for myself. And then I explored, and I came across new interests and new hobbies that did not make sense to them, and that later became now an artistic expression for me, that I do a lot in the world. So this is a journey that when someone you love is going through, whether you like it or not, you're on this journey with them, and it's going to affect you, and it's going to challenge you on what your beliefs are and what your thinking is, and because they're going to really need to have to find their own on this path. So, as parents, if it's your child and it's that you've raised, I mean, I'm giving you some broad guidelines here, because the details are going to be so specific, filled in by your child. And all I can say is that to help them in this process and not harm them is being able to respect and give them space to start to discover and explore being in the world, and being in their body, and being in their mind in a way that feels right to them. And that's a really hard thing to do, I would imagine, for a parent, is especially as you've seen your loved one go through a life-threatening brain disease. Um, it's just scary to respect what that path looks like for them. But all of this is grounded, all these guidelines and listening and responding and respecting is really grounded if your loved one um, is getting treatment, is getting clinical treatment with a team of specialized health professionals who know how to support people through this disease. Because if it's not grounded in treatment, this brain disease is very manipulative. You can think that your loved one is okay, but we have, based on what they physically look, but time and time again, we've experienced, those of us who help people with this disease, who could look okay and who unfortunately who aren't okay and don't live and don't survive, because you can't judge a person's wellness with an eating disorder based on how they look physically. And and even what they're saying sometimes, because like I originally said, it is a disease in the brain, and they don't know they're in that disease is what's actually speaking to you. And so it's the treatment team, it's the clinical providers who have the expertise and who will be able to also look at the health of the body, particularly with the Upstate New York Eating Disorder Service and the way that they treat their clients. They can really see what's going on with the health of the body by doing their body comp testing. So this support plan that I'm suggesting is really grounded in making sure that person who's in need is getting the help they need. So let's recap. So how we can help our loved ones without harming is by listening, how we listen, how we respond, and how we respect that journey. And so what is harmful in those three categories is, if we take the first phase of listening, is when we don't listen, when we actually defend and rebut and have an argument for whatever our loved one is saying. You know, this disease can be very personal, and part of your loved one's journey that could have caused them pain could be you, and you might have not meant to cause them pain, and for them during that process, they're going to have to take the Band-Aid off that, and they might have to talk about it. And it's hard. It was hard for my parents to hear in ways that was hurtful to me, because their intention wasn't that to be so. So in the listening phase, what's harmful is when you take it all personally. Even when it is personal is when you take it in personally. And so if you can listen with some space and knowing, yes, it might be personal what they're saying to you now, but having space within your own self so you're not reacting and defending and fighting, that's not going to be helpful to them. It might be hurtful to you in that moment, but I think, if you can be in this support, if you can go in with the mindset that you did the best you could, and that this isn't about blame. This isn't about blame. This is about discovering the different points that all contributed to this. Because that person, those who are suffering, have to really sift through all those. We have to sift through all those little things that happened so we can make sense of it all. That's what it's like for us. We have to go through and see that big picture of how, our parents and our influences in our life, we need to see that big picture so we can start to say, okay, and make sense of it all. And so what happens during that process is those particular parents then start to hear about the times that influenced us in a negative way, in a harmful way. But the sharing in that isn't to blame. The sharing in that is to, for the person going through it, is to have a self-awareness and an empowerment of the self so they can move on from it. So in that listening phase, as much as you can, not take it so personal, and not look to um, uh, and not look to focus on language that feeds the unhealthy messaging about the body. Focusing on um, and listening. If you're going to start talking about, oh no, but you're skinny, or focusing on their body, and those beauty standards that the world uses, isn't going to be helpful either. Oh, or listening from a place of, oh well, you're not that sick, or so we're dismissing what they're going through. All of that response is really harmful. So in the respond phase, same type of thing. Are we responding that they're okay because they look like they're okay because their bodies fit some that standard? So um, those those are ways that it can be very harmful to the person who's going through this. And then the the last part of what we're talking about with respecting is, you know, when we are trying to support our loved one, and we're wanting them to stay really focused on the path that we've had decided for them, when they're trying to carve a new path for themselves, that really harms. We want to respect their process. We want to respect um, what happens even with their own body. There's a lot of times that when people are through the healing stage of the eating disorder, their bodies can change, their body weights can change, and we want to respect that, no matter what our own beliefs are about what the body should look like. We really need to respect that their body is going to go through what it needs to find its set point, to find its balance. So these are the 3 guidelines when we think about how we help someone without harming them: is how we listen, how we respond, and how we're respecting their discovery and their recovery. And so if that's all you take away, that's great, because then you can fill in those buckets, those 3 buckets, you can fill them in, that's unique to your loved one. Listen, respond, respect. How those 3 categories come to life in your support of them is going to be most critical. And if your intention is to help them without harming, then you're going to be listening from a place of knowing how the disease can impact the brain. And then it is not going to make sense. You're going to be responding from a place of getting them support, and then also encouraging and nurturing their recovery process and respecting what that looks like for them. So I wish you well. I wish you well through this time. And want to honor the difficulty that it brings to you and your family and your friends of this, but know that every body matters, right? Each of our bodies, all of us matter. And if you can accept the fact how this disease can hijack the brain and understand that they are still inside of that and underneath the a loving and someone who needs your love, because what we need when we're in this the most are people who love us no matter what. And so I strongly encourage you to do whatever you can to stay as that support person, even when it becomes really difficult and trying at times, if it becomes personal or not. But what we constantly need is people who are going to love us unconditionally. So we will see you next month on the second Wednesday of the month. Thank you. Be well, my friends.